Hello there and welcome to this video. As a progressive rock musician, I get asked a lot about my opinion about certain progressive metal bands or math rock bands. And I know this is going to keep cropping up. And in some of the comments, people are saying, please give your opinion about, math rock or gent or all these different terms for what is basically a certain style of heavy metal which relies on sort of virtuosity and complexity. I don't listen to that stuff at all. I dip my ear in every now and then, but I'm not a fan of it. I don't actually like it very much. I think it serves a purpose. Which is to sort of impress adolescent musicians with sort of technical virtuosity. Now that claim could be laid at a lot of the music that I discuss here, but I think there's something else in the music that we've covered on this channel. There's something else going on. So I thought it would be an interesting idea just to talk this through and give you my opinion. This might be part one because there's going to be a lot in this. I've got a lot of reasons why I don't like that form of music. It's not just one, but let's have a go anyway. So, progressive metal as a concept, right? Metal, the idea of heavy metal really goes back to Black Sabbath, right? Which made an album in 1970 called Black Sabbath. I would say that album has progressive tendencies and actually was an influence on progressive rock. Sabbath were quite innovative in their song structures, which are progressive in structure, as is the subject matter. All those things that on this channel we've defined what prog is. But if we wind back to the beginnings of prog and look at 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson's, I would argue that as well is a heavy metal record, and I think was very influenced on metal. I'm sure Sabbath heard that and it propelled them to create the sound that they did. So this idea of progressive ideas of metal being fused at some point, no, it's there right from day one, right? That's in there right from day one. If we look at the formative, rock bands like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and then Judas Priest, they all have progressive tendencies. It's all there, But in 1973, we get a sort of Led Zeppelin, influenced copy band called Rush emerge. One of the great rock bands, but definitely in Led Zepp pocket. That then team up with Neil Peart, who has got an interest in progressive rock. They've all got an interest in progressive rock in that band. And I think that's where the idea of progressive metal starts, is with Rush. I absolutely love Rush. You can go and check my videos out on Rush. The thing about Rush is the songwriting. This is the key thing for me. All great music's about songwriting, and songwriting is actually it's the marrying of a sort of motion of feeling in the music with a story. Story could be the lyrics. What's the song about? A lot of the great instrumental music also creates this idea of a story. It's much more difficult to do in instrumental music. Is to have this story. The story might be sort of John Coltrane, Love Supreme, and him sort of his sort of spiritual experience. That could well be the story. The story could be Miles Davis and his wanting to appropriate street culture in the early 70s, wanting to bring in that idea of bringing those things together because of a concept of blackness. It's more than just the notes. Right, all the great instrumental music has this story, but in the case of the early prog metal bands, they have the story because they're writing songs. Now, it's undeniable that Rush are fantastic songwriters. The reason why they're there is because of the songs, right? Now, as heavy metal progresses, we then see the emergence of the new wave of British heavy metal, and this is a real response to punk. Punk, in some ways, was more metal than metal. It upped the ante. It was more aggressive. It was more visceral than what was being passed as metal at the time. And so the bands that come in afterwards, like Diamond Head and Iron Maiden, they've really got an ear for punk, but they've got a huge ear for prog, and they prog it up even more. You know, Iron Maiden and Diamond Head have massive progressive tendencies. You know, I've met Brian Tatler from Diamond Head a number of times and spoken to him about this, and he's a big fan of progressive rock, and that stuff's is in there. So when Metallica then start to pull all these influences in from these early new wave of British heavy metal bands, they bring out this thrash metal, which is the logical extension of this sort of punk influenced new wave of British heavy metal. But there's also a huge progressive rock influence. You know, if you listen to Master of Puppets, that's a progressive metal. So we cannot take the prog out of metal. It's there from day one. I think the term really it starts to emerge with the emergence of Dream Theater. Now, when Dream Theater came out in the early 90s, I think me personally, at that point, I was in my early 20s, and my musical tastes had become more sophisticated. I've done that. I hate doing that, but I've done it. They had become more sophisticated. You know, I'd gone through a period in the 80s of becoming, being a real jazz snob. You know, of only listening to sort of acoustic jazz, very freak, avant-garde jazz. I was a big ECM music fan. And I was brought back into rock, but it wasn't by the progressive metalers. It was actually by the big three, Anthrax, Metallica, and Slayer, although I was a big Anthrax fan. It was the prog metal bands like Red Hot Chili Pepper. It was bands like Living Colour. It was bands like Primus, but also a lot of stuff that was going on in dance music, electronic music, which I found very interesting. So I was pulled back into rock and pop. But once I came back to it, I checked out Dream Theater. Someone says, you've got to check out Dream Theater. And I went and got the Images and Words. It's in my collection out there. I think I listened to it twice. It just didn't register with me at all. I knew what they were doing, but as I say, I knew what they were doing. It sounded like Iron Maiden. It sounded like Rush put through Iron Maiden. It was a revamp of what Rush were doing. Dream Theater do write great songs. There's fantastic songwriting there, and I recognise that. Although it did seem to me to have its roots in sort of more 80s rock music. And it wasn't my thing at this point in time when those bands started to merge. I was listening to like Jungle, Electronica. I was into Aphex Twin or Tekra. I was listening to like the Diggable Planets, Michelle Ndegeocello. I was listening to like neo soul, like Erykah Badu, Jill Scott. All that was around me. That was what I was into. For me, I would have felt like I was going backwards in listening to Dream Theater. I just wasn't interested. That's something you've got to understand. I just wasn't interested. This is quite ironic many years later when we formed Frost. Frost has a foot in progressive metal, and Mike Portnoy and Jordan Rudess became big fans of the band, and I ended up touring with Dream Theater, and I actually at that time was quite friendly with Mike Portnoy and Jordan. And it was quite embarrassing because they were big fans of my band, and I didn't really know their material, you know, that well. Things like Liquid Tension Experiment, which is a little bit closer to fusion, I'd listened to and I liked more, you know. And I'm a big fan of Tony Levin. But again, being a big fusion fan, it seemed to be, it wasn't at the same level as the fusion I'd grown up and listened to. And at the time, what say Steve Coleman was doing with M-Bass, or what was happening on the Bill Laswell albums, seemed far more advanced than what was going on with Liquid Tension Experiment. But these bands have gone on, and they've really blossomed, you know. During lockdown, I thought I'd have an explore into these bands, and I listened to Animals as Leaders, and I listened to Polyphia. Animals as Leaders, the drummer, Matt Garscott, he's definitely one of the greatest drummers on the planet. He has got all the influences going, all the chops, all the technique. It's quite incredible what they're doing, and musically what they're doing in that band is absolutely great. You know, I don't want to criticise it, but it sounds too orchestrated to my ears. You know, they never let loose. There's no fire in there. It sounds like it's been really well rehearsed, and everything is nailed on the money, and they've got everything correct. And I think that is the attraction, you know, for young musicians. I think this is the key thing. It might be an age thing. Perhaps I loved Rush, and perhaps I loved, you know, Iron Maiden, and then I loved Yes and Genesis. Perhaps at that age, when I got to those bands at 12, 13, and I was learning my instrument, you know, I needed to hear something like that I could respect and look up to, that I could have as a goal as a musician. You know, this is part of learning the instrument, is you have to aspire. And if you're a musician, you have to aspire technically to get to certain places. As you develop those skills, you get those places, you start to question it then. You know, as soon as you actually end up with a record deal and you're trying to make albums, you start to scratch your head thinking, you know, what is it that makes this work? You know, what's going to make people buy it? And you realise it's not about your technique. It's not about how technically proficient you are. It's about communicating something feeling-wise to the audience. I think a lot of these bands, what you've got is they're appreciated by adolescents or people with a certain adolescent mindset musically. I'm saying they might be a mature adult, but as a musician, they're at an adolescent level, ability-wise, and they are still focused on the technical aspects of playing, right? I believe when you learn an instrument, you go through 3 stages. The first stage is the motivational stage, and this is all emotion. It's all emotion. And this is where you just hear some music and you get fired up by that. For a lot of us, that is metal. Heavy metal is a visceral form that just gets you in the guts. You know, when I first heard Motorhead, it wasn't the technical aspects of Motorhead that blew me away. It was a visceral excitement that got me in the guts, and it made me want to move and jump about. And that movement and jumping aboutness had to go somewhere, and it went onto the drums. When I was first started playing the drums, I wasn't trying to be technical. I was just wanting to be a part of the music, whether it be AC/DC or Judas Priest or Motorhead. That's all I wanted, was to be a part of the music. And that motivation, it develops skill. And so you go into the second phase, which is skill development. It's essential for every musician is to develop the basic skills. And when you're developing skills, your mind becomes like a magnet to certain things. So when you hear certain things going on, you focus on it entirely. If you're listening to heavy metal, you're going to start to focus on that, and suddenly you become aware that, well, that drummer's that's good, that one's amazing, and that guitarist, he's not great, but what they're doing on guitar here, that's like baffling. And we all go through this, you know. So, you know, for my age group, is, you know, you're listening to Iron Maiden, you're listening to Black Sabbath, you're listening to Motorhead, and then suddenly Eddie Van Halen comes out, and Eddie Van Halen's like, oh my God, what's going on the guitar here? This is really, really incredible, you know, and it sort of stops you in your tracks at that point, you know, and you start to gravitate to that more. With drummers, often it's people like John Bonham. They hear John Bonham, it's like, oh my God, this is another level of drumming, and that starts to take you down a certain process. If you've gone down the Eddie Van Halen route, you know, at the end of that is Alan Holdsworth. And for a lot of musicians, you know, metal acts as a springboard out of the heavy metal genre into all other genres, and I've done a video of that, which is you know, which looks as heavy metal as a gateway to jazz and fusion. But that's the process that many musicians get in when they're young. When I say young, I mean mentally young. You know, someone could have started at 40 years old, you know, or 50 years old, and they could be totally love the drums, be bashing around, and then they get to this skill point. And as soon as that skill point, you go and you listen, you hear Animals and Leaders, you go, oh my God, what is this guy doing on drums? That's my goal. That is what I'm aiming for. Now, I found that for most musicians, and I think most musicians who have clicked on this video who like prog metal, let's see if this actually works. This is where we've got to with this video, right? And this is the point of it. Right, how many of you are quite depressed with the thought of playing the instrument, that actually you find it's all about skill, and you don't cut it, and you're not good enough, and you never will be, right? That idea, you know, is really compounded in these modern prog metal bands. It's superhuman, right? And it makes you feel bad. Whereas metal used to make you feel good, it ends up making you feel bad, right? It's depressing, and there's some musicians can play this stuff and they've got their little YouTube videos and they've got it down note for note, right? And you see other people that can do it and it's depressing, right? This is the point where you have to move to the third stage of being a musician. And that means dropping this style of music and leaving it behind and starting to realising that music is not about technical skill. It's an aspect of it, yes, but a very small aspect. Music's about something else. It's about expression and emotion and feeling. And it's about your individuality and what you bring to the table. And the third stage, which is mastery of the instrument, is taking that skill that you've developed and then being able to temper it with your individuality and try and create something which expresses what you are and what you like and what you do. If you could do that, then you will have a career in this industry, because all the great musicians, that's what they possess. It is not the Olympics. Okay, now let's get on to the final thing. When you do go and check out those albums by these musicians, right, a new thing has emerged, and that's digital recording technology. It's Pro Tools, how DAWs work. When I was working in the prog world and we were allied to prog metal, I became disillusioned by it, because what was happening in the production process is my drums were being quantized, they were being re-edited, they were being re-triggered. The whole thing wasn't real, right? Now, I'm sure there are players out there that can play all that hard prog metal stuff. The reason they can is because kids are going up now that have been listening to albums where the drums were programmed. They are playing a machine aesthetic. Okay, and that's fantastic, but that is happening a lot in the musical world at the moment. It's all about the grid, it's all about numbers, it's all about showing how competent you are and in control. That's the aesthetic of this style of music, right? Personally, I think the pendulum which moves between emotionalism and perfectionism, we're far too over on the perfectionist side. What we need to hear are some mistakes. What we need to hear is something rough around the edges. So I am not criticising a band like Animals as leaders. I think they're fantastic musicians. But what I want to hear is them in a room playing. I want to hear what it really sounds like, because to me, it sounds too produced. And what I mean by too produced is they're too obsessed with the grid. Everything's perfectly in tune. Everything's perfectly in time. It's superhuman, Now, I'm sure that they've practiced in a way where they're able to do that live. I'm not criticising, I'm not saying they can't do it. There are some musicians that can't do it, and it is done in the studio, and that is the case. But I'm not saying these people can't do it. What I'm criticising is the choices of their aesthetic. And I'm sure if you ask them, they know that that is part of the aesthetic. That is what this is about. It's about showing their mastery of competence and showing how incredible powerful they are, as human beings, to be able to pull off these things. There is, in this music, it's not humble, right? There is no sense of insecurity. Or what would be the word? No sense of human frailty in this music. Now think of someone like John Coltrane. For all his technique and all that, technical brilliance that's in there, you also have a huge sense of human frailty, of someone searching, of not quite knowing the answers, of someone expressing something else, a scream, a desperation, of search for spirituality. That's all in Coltrane's music, right? That's why when you listen to Coltrane, amidst all the virtuosity is also all this other stuff, which so many people will go, well, it just sounds like he's screaming or shouting on his instrument. It just sounds like they're trying to kill something, and all this type of stuff. That's in there as well. Think of the really, truly great musicians that have changed this, changed our view of music. Someone like a Miles Davis. Miles Davis has that virtuosity, but he also has a frailty in there. I do not hear this in these modern progressive metal bands. I'm not a fan, and I hope I've explained my case there, why that is. And it's not like I don't like the ingredients that are there, you know. Prog metal, so to conclude, prog metal, silly name. Prog has always been metal and metal's always been prog. They hold hands, it's all the way down. You know, what isn't prog metal? You know, but in recent times, prog metal has become a genre which has become all about the ego and showing off. And it's not what I like. I like that skill to be there, but I like it to be tempered by some sort of humanity, because in the end, it's the feeling and the emotions that we listen to in music. We, you know, just sat there appreciating the grid. It does not make music great. I hope that's explained my case, and if you like this video, please like and subscribe and do all that stuff, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, bye.